In this video, I'm going to give background information on Julius Caesar as well as Shakespeare's source, Plutarch's Parallel Lives. Shakespeare first learned the story about Julius Caesar during his schooling, in which he had to translate Plutarch's Parallel Lives, which was a work originally in Latin, and he had to translate it into English, as well as translating those different parallel lives from English into Latin. Plutarch was a historian who lived not very long after the events that he wrote about from ancient Rome took place. And this would have been part of Shakespeare's learning when he was coming up and learning his letters. And therefore, Shakespeare's source for a lot of the Roman plays come from Plutarch's Parallel Lives, as well as the Greek plays that he has. This includes Julius Caesar, Antony and Cleopatra, Coriolanus. Julius Caesar history, some of the background. In the world literature or world history textbook that we've studied, we learn about how he's one of the greatest military generals of all time. And that's an arguable point, but he is one of two people to successfully cross the English Channel, this area of ocean right here between France and England, and was able to take control all the way to Hadrian's Wall, which was just about the border between Scotland and England. He conquered Spain and France. That's his background, was that he was a military general. Politically, he was part of what was called the First Triumvirate. There were three people ruling at the same time, and the three people ruling during his time were Crassus, Pompey, and Caesar. Crassus was known because he was exceptionally wealthy. These other two were wealthy, but they also had the military background, which made it very easy for Pompey and Caesar to get rid of Crassus, historically speaking. Once they did that, then eventually Caesar and Pompey engaged in a massive civil war in which Caesar ultimately was victorious over Pompey and became the single ruler of Rome. Caesar would have been considered notorious. In fact, he was the lover of Servilia at about the time that Marcus Brutus, and that's his mother, that's Marcus Brutus's mother, became pregnant for Brutus. And some people speculate that Brutus is Caesar's biological son. The first piece of evidence is that Caesar was with Servilia at about the same time she became pregnant with Brutus. The second piece of information is that during the civil war with Pompey, Brutus had joined Pompey's side, and yet Caesar had refused to take him or have him captured or executed, but rather gave his forces specific orders to not forcibly catch Brutus, but to let him surrender of his own accord and to treat him well once he did so. One of the interesting things about the background of Caesar is Caesar did indeed have seizures. He had what is called epilepsy, or is what in Shakespeare's time was called the falling sickness. So this word actually comes from Caesar's name, seizure. A caesura is a poetical term that refers to a stop in the middle of a line of poetry, either marked by a dash, a period, or a semicolon. And the word czar, the basic Russian stem for king, also comes from the name Caesar, as well as Caesarean section. Marcus Brutus, who was the main character of the play, was noble, well-liked, and considered good by the people. His philosophy was that he was a stoic. His whole thing was that one should remain calm and moderate regardless of good or bad happenings, and that reasoning should rule decisions rather than emotions. He is known because he killed Caesar for what he believed was the good of Rome and to avoid monarchy. Another character within the play is Mark Antony. Mark Antony was a military general. He was characterized as liking to party and was given to engaging in a lot of acts like drinking and hanging out with a lot of people in a lot of different contexts, to use a little bit of tact. Another character from the play that we will see historically is Octavius Augustus Caesar, and he later becomes Emperor of Rome, and if you read your world history textbook, he's famous for bringing about what is called Pax Romana, which is the Roman peace. Here follows the list of strange happenings in history that actually emerge in the play and Shakespeare uses for dramatic effect, although he changes them so that it fits the context of the play rather than history. In history, Caesar was offered a crown 3 different times. This took place over the course of several years, not all in one scene, like the way that it appears in Act 1, Scene 2. Caesar had actually referred to Brutus and Cassius as skinny men at one point, and that he preferred to have fat men around him. This is later on played in Act 1, Scene 2 as well. In history, supposedly, Calpurnia, Caesar's wife, had a nightmare that Caesar was being stabbed and bleeding, while many senators smiled and bathed their hands in the blood, which you'll see that Shakespeare uses for foreshadowing effects. Supposedly, and this was once again gotten from Plutarch's Parallel Lives, supposedly these augurs, which an augur is a fancy way of saying psychic or oracle, they supposedly cut open a lion to tell the future, and it was missing a heart, which would have been the absolute worst omen you could have. Supposedly, during this time as well, according to Plutarch's Parallel Lives, a lion was running around in the capital the night prior to Caesar's murder. Comet was seen, meteor showers, an owl supposedly perched in the marketplace at noon, earthquakes, fire shot out of the hand of a slave. And if you read Plutarch's Parallel Lives, Plutarch kind of describes some of these events, although it's somewhat suspect as to whether this was actually true or not. This is absolutely true, though, in history. Caesar did die at the base of Pompey's statue, which would have been a strange and ominous way to die. In the play and in history, a senator by the name of Popilius Lena, a senator who was not involved in the conspiracy, does randomly walk up to Cassius and say, "I hope your endeavors go well today." And Cassius thinks that Popilius means the conspiracy, whereas Popilius Lena was probably just making some sort of small talk. But it does cause Cassius to be a little bit disheveled, and in the play it's used to show Cassius as losing his temper and being more of a foil to Brutus later on. Portia, Brutus's wife, committed suicide by, quote, eating fire, according to Plutarch's Parallel Lives. That would have meant that she ate hot coals. And she had other interesting characteristics in Plutarch's Parallel Lives, and she will in the play. Fun fact, too, according to the play and according to Plutarch's Parallel Lives, supposedly Cassius died and committed suicide on the same day that it was his birthday. Other interesting thing, Antony and Octavius, even though they're allies in the battles against Brutus and Cassius, and in the play, they later on engage in another civil war with each other in which Octavius is victory. This is actually laid out in the play called Antony and Cleopatra, in which Antony and Cleopatra were aligned with each other, and they were fighting against Octavius Caesar, and ultimately they lost, which is part of the play for Shakespeare. Octavius is actually later named Emperor of Rome, which makes him essentially a monarch, the very thing that Brutus was trying to prevent in killing Caesar. And that's why, too, as a historical character and as a character in the story, the events that take place are ironic, because Brutus's motivations are try to stop monarchy and those types of things. And ultimately, the thing he was trying to avoid was exactly what happened, which makes him a tragic hero, which is exactly why he makes a good tragic hero and can be compared to somebody like, say, Oedipus Rex, who caused his own downfall even though he's trying to go against fate, caused the very thing he was trying to avoid. So those are some of the historical background and facts for Julius Caesar that you will need to know.